Home Street Bank is the sponsor of our podcast. Go to homestreetbank.com to learn more about them. They're our lender of choice, whether your banking needs are personal or business. Great people, great rates, tremendous service. That's homestreetbank.com.
How much does your sales presentation stand out? What would your customer remember more than any other sales presentation? An important question, and we'll dive in on this episode of The Buyer's Mind.
Welcome to The Buyer's Mind, where we take a closer look deep inside your customer's decision-making mechanism to reverse engineer the perfect sales presentation. Now, please welcome your host, Jeff Shore.
Well, welcome everyone once again to The Buyer's Mind. I am your host, Jeff Shore, and we're going to dive in here as we always do in the way that people make decisions. What is your customer looking to do, and how do we make it easy for them to do just that? And I want to suggest to you here that there's a real problem that we face in business in general and in sales in particular, and it's called sameness. It's the curse of a customer having the same experience over and over again, no matter where they are shopping. If we want to try and make it easy for a customer to buy, then providing the same solution and the same approach and the same experience that everybody else is not the way to do it. So here's the scenario. You're in the market for a home in a specific school district, but you aren't really sure what you're looking for. So you take an entire weekend, you make 10 stops in 2 days, 5 at new home communities and 5 open houses for resale homes. Now, it's Monday. And as a customer, I am left with a stack of brochures and flyers. And here's the question. What really stands out? What is truly memorable in that otherwise mind-numbing experience? Well, let me hear from our show producer, Paul Murphy. Murph, imagine yourself in that situation. What would that look like for you?
The only thing I can imagine is my exhaustion. It's just so much of seeing the same thing over and over. You know, what is there to differentiate anything for me? It's just doesn't help. It tires me out just thinking about it.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that it's just being tired. I think you're absolutely right. I think that not only are we tired from the physical exertion, but I'm actually mentally tired of trying to identify what would separate, of trying to look for something that is different. This is this curse called sameness. It's like a disease, and it is crippling our customer. Sameness is brain strain. So why does that happen? I mean, how are we so adept at repeating the same experiences over and over again, just like all of our customers do? And then what would make that unique? And today we're going to hear from Scott McKain, what he says about that, and then perhaps we can make some much needed adjustments. I think you're going to love this interview, and I really, as you listen to Scott, I want to really encourage you to ask yourself, where are you afflicted by sameness, and what can you do to break out of that? Well, I am thrilled to welcome one of the most influential business thinkers in the world today, and he has the resume to back that up. He's a prolific speaker and author with more books than I can certainly count, a member of both the Sales and Marketing Hall of Fame and the National Speakers Association Hall of Fame, and that's got to be a very small number of people who can claim a spot in both of those groups. He's spoken in all 50 states, 21 countries, from a dirt floor hut in Brazil to the Oval Office. His new book is just released. It's called Iconic: How Organizations and Leaders Attain, Sustain, and Regain the Highest Level of Distinction. Joining us from Las Vegas, Scott McKain. Scott, how are you, sir?
Jeff, I'm terrific after that introduction. My goodness, thank you very much. It's great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
You're one of those guys where when you walk down the hall at the National Speakers Association convention, people know you're in the room. You're bigger than life. You're bigger than life.
Yeah, but my wife says if I keep eating on it, it'll be much larger than life.
Fair enough.
Well, I've been fortunate to be a member of the National Speakers Association since 1982. So I've been around a while, and because that made some great friends there. there, of course. So.
Your new book is called Iconic, and you are certainly iconic in the industry. And it really is. The National Speakers Association, for those of you who are out there, you've never even heard of the National Speakers Association, the NSA, it really is an amazing group of individuals who are all committed to really raising the standard of what public communication looks like. And Scott, I know you've been instrumental and architectural in making sure that organization is raising the bar. So it's not it's an amazing organization just from the sense of family and love and support that you're going to get there.
Well, you're very kind, Jeff. Thank you for that. And I think there's so many parallels to the world of sales as well. I mean, one of the challenges I think we face in the speaking industry is the same in sales, and that is that, you know, if I claim I'm a doctor, they're going to come and lock me up, right? I mean, if I claim that I'm a lawyer, somebody's going to sue me. Mm-hmm. But anyone can claim they're a salesperson. Anyone can claim they're a speaker, and so it behooves all of us in our respective professions to not only be the best that we can be, but also do all that we can to elevate the standards of the profession. So it's to our mutual benefit.
Sure, absolutely. And now you've written yet another book. Before we get to Iconic, your latest book here, do you have a favorite when you look back on all the books that you've written? Is there one that you look back and you say, that was really fun, or I'm really glad that I wrote that book?
Wow, that's an interesting. I've never been asked that. You know, I think there's something about your first one that's kind of your mm-hmm. favorite. It was the hardest one to write because I'd never done it before. Yeah. And my first book, the first one I had a co-author with, and the first book that I wrote totally, you know, that I wrote every word, was All Business is Show Business. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it kind of combined two aspects of my life. At that particular time, because I had a secret life at that time. Yeah. It's not nearly that exciting. I was trying to build my speaking business, but at the same time, I had the greatest part-time gig in the world. I was a movie reviewer, so I would spend during the week giving speeches and working my business, and then on weekends, I'd get to meet celebrities and interview them and do movie reviews. And I was syndicated to 80 television stations in the United States, Canada, and Australia. And I realized at that time, now this is, you know, the early 80s, that there were things about the experience that Hollywood was doing that we in business needed to know. And there were also things in business that Hollywood needed to know. And so I put those two concepts together, and that's where All Business is Show Business came from. And so I think there's something about your first that's the best. My biggest selling book is What Customers Really Want. Mm-hmm. And I think there, because of something I know you've talked about on the podcast here before, and that's the importance of simplicity. And that's mm-hmm. such a simple title. You know, if I say All Business is Show Business, then some people, you know, have to say, well, what do you mean by that, right? But when I say here's what customers really want, you know, it's pretty easy to know what that is. I listened to your podcast recently with your friend Andy Paul mm-hmm. talking about simplicity, and it really struck me that's part of the key to that title is this book tells you what customers really want. So I appreciate. I've never been asked that before. That's a great question. But yeah, I think, you know, there's something about your first one that really.
I totally agree. And now you do know that your first book is not supposed to be as successful as was, because I read All Business is Show Business back, I don't know, it was 15 years ago or so. I don't think it had been out that long. It's not supposed to do that well, right? You do understand that, right?
Well, I got very, very fortunate. I'll tell you, because it kind of captured lightning in a bottle, I think, in a way, because it was about the time that people were beginning to change from talking about customer service to it was the very beginning of the customer experience. Mm-hmm. And there is a difference between service and experience. And I was very, very fortunate that it was one of the first books to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that for me, the first book, it was a book on sales objections. It was self-published. And I remember that I had ordered, because I got a good price on them, I ordered 2,000 copies, and I came home from a business trip, walked into the garage, there's this pallet of books. And, you know, I walk into the garage and I'm thinking, what have I done? I only have 5 friends on the planet, and they're not going to read this book. And but there was something about opening that first box with a box cutter in my hand, shaking just a little bit. And you're right. There's something about your first book. So no question.
Oh, it's so true. And you know something, Jeff, one of the things we've seen change so much too is, back then there was kind of a stigma on self-publishing that doesn't exist today.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I mean, nobody says, "Oh, honey, let's go to the theater. Universal has a new movie out." Right? I mean, and so it's more about how do we hook them with the title? How do we, inform or engage them with the content? How do we do all those kinds of things, which to me really relates to sales. And all that you talk about here is it is so much more than just, selling that particular product.
And speaking of just that hooking them with a title, the title of the new book is Iconic, How Organizations and Leaders Attain, Sustain, and Regain the Highest Level of Distinction. That's a big title. And I suspect, and you could confirm or deny this, but I suspect that you just wanted to blow right past the idea of, quote, standing out. Yes?
Yeah, one of the things I say in the book is when I went through a personal situation that led me to start considering what distinction meant and all that. And, it was one of the collapse of distinction almost 10 years ago, or 10 years ago, it has been now, was one of the first books to talk about standing out. That was the subtitle, Stand Out and Move Up as Your Competition Fails. And it came out at the very onset of the recession. Mm-hmm. But really what happened was there was one of my clients, Fairmont Hotels, and I was speaking to another group at the Fairmont Scottsdale Princess, and the general manager and his top assistant, the associate general manager, we were having a cup of coffee, and they had taken the book Create Distinction, and everybody had to read a chapter a week. And then they would get together in their groups and talk about how do we create distinctive housekeeping? How do we have distinctive valet parkers? What do we do at every level of our company to be distinctive? And they had seen, everything, all of the metrics that they follow in terms of, what percent of capacity of sales are they achieving? And profitability and sales to corporate groups, meetings there. All of those had grown exponentially. And so one of the questions that was almost asked in jest is, what's after distinction? Once you become distinctive, then what do you do? And I'd never really thought about that before. And I just kind of blurted out over the table, well, next you got to become iconic. And they both went, that's it. Okay, so now how do we become iconic? And so the book is the new book, Iconic, is kind of a reflection of what I've learned from working with them, from working with other groups. And one of the things I really tried to do is to stay away from the Apple, Southwest, Google, Amazon approach, and really focus on some different types of businesses that have achieved what I call iconic status.
It's interesting that that's an important way to look at it from my perspective, just because a lot of people and companies probably already think they are distinctive in some way. Now, I think there's a strong argument that that's perhaps a little bit of delusion going on. But even for me, I look at salespeople who, in their own presentation, they think that they are distinctive already. I'm not quite sure that I always believe that. But if you have that tendency to overrate yourself, we do see that a lot, especially in Western cultures where we overrate our own talents and abilities. You almost have to look at it and say, okay, great. Let's go on the assumption that we're already distinctive. Now, what does iconic look like? Whether you're an individual or a corporation, you almost need to think that way in order to ensure that you're standing out from everybody else.
You make such an extraordinary point, Jeff, and I appreciate that greatly, because part of what happens is if you ask people if they're distinctive, do they stand out? You're exactly right. People don't evaluate. So with iconic, there's the additional question: are you so good at what you do that you are the standard, not only in your own organization, but you become a standard that could be applied everywhere? Mm-hmm. So in other words, part of what makes for an iconic business, whether it's the Scottsdale Princess or whether it's St. Elmo's Steakhouse in Indianapolis or the Millionaire Chimney Sweep in Nashville, Tennessee that I talk about, is that what they do is so good that regardless of the business or industry that you are in, they become a shining example of what we should all be doing. And that's a higher standard and naturally harder to hit.
Sure, absolutely. So let's unpack the problem here a little bit, because the flip side to that is the idea of uniformity right, that we see over and over again. And it is just so common where you see organizations or people within organizations who are just, it's lemming-like in their approach. And I know you and I have seen the same thing even as we evaluate professional speakers. But let's face it, if you speak for a living, you're going to evaluate other speakers.
Oh,
and,
sure.
And there are times where it's like, oh, you were channeling this person and you're being that person and you were coached by this person. And you can just sense that lack of authenticity, whether it's in individuals or organization. What causes that? Why is that happening? Why do we see so much uniformity? Is it just a desire for comfort, for safety? What's going on, Scott?
Yeah, it's almost as archaic as it sounds. It's almost back to the old Maslow hierarchy of needs. Mm-hmm. In my previous book, Create Distinction, I talked about the 3 destroyers of differentiation. And destroyer number 1 is copycat competition. Mm-hmm. If I'm in the same industry and I see you succeeding on a particular path, then my gut level visceral response is to either imitate it or to try to do it and do you one better. Mm-hmm. And so we see 2 dry cleaners in the same community, and one starts, cleaning shirts for $1.49. And the next thing we know, the one down the street is either matching that price or trying to beat that price, mm-hmm. as opposed to trying to do what it takes to become distinctive and then iconic. It's the path of least resistance. It is the path that in the old school of business, we have been, I guess, almost predetermined that, that's how you're supposed to do it. That's what you're supposed to do. And what we find is that the world has changed. And it's changed so much, we have to have different approaches and different strategies and different tactics. But yet we get so busy doing what we do, we don't take time to think about what we do. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the challenges that most sales professionals get in, is that I got to get up this morning and, I've got to make something happen. And so the time for reflection and the time for introspection and the time for learning gets compressed, the more pressure there is to close a deal. But I think that's part of why podcasts like yours have become so successful, is that now we can plug this in our car and we can listen to it during our drive time or our downtime. We have to have that time for the thinking that it takes to stay up with the changes that are happening in the marketplace.
One thing that's interesting about the way you approach this, Scott, is that you study organizations. And again, I think you're absolutely right. And I've been guilty of this too, talking about, Apple and Southwest and Google and all the usual suspects. But you are very interested in smaller organizations and mom and pop shops and even in individuals. I mean, that's the whole Taxi Terry story and then subsequent book was all about your very, very keen eye for looking for distinction. How did you develop that sense of trying to figure out what are the common traits that cause people to stand out? Because if you're like, if I have your life here, you're traveling all the time, you have different experiences all the time, and after a while, they all start to blend in. You're eating in 15 restaurants a week, and you will never remember one single food server except the one that stands out because they are distinctive or iconic. How did you develop that eye for spotting people who are really, or organizations who are really breaking the mold and doing their own thing?
Jeff, it's I appreciate you asking that. It's kind of a interesting. I hope it's an interesting story. One thing that some folks know, but maybe not a lot of folks know, is several years ago, I lost my wife to cancer, mm-hmm. and I had to kind of shut down the speaking business for a period of time because I was the only caregiver, and that became a problem with me being on the road and she couldn't continue in her career and needed help and care. And also, obviously, we wanted to spend time together. And so after she passed away, I had to kind of relaunch the business. I was left with a lot of bills and medical debt and everything, and had lost my life savings. And so I had to get back out there. And I started the process of trying to relaunch my business by calling speakers bureaus. Now, I know you know what but for those that don't, a speakers bureau, it's kind of like a travel agent is in a strange way. Meeting planners, professionals will call a speakers bureau, ask for a recommendation. The bureau then recommends a speaker, and we pay them a commission on the bookings. So I started by calling them and saying, when you recommend me, when you try to sell me to your clients, what do you say? And the number one answer, Jeff, was a good speaker and a really nice guy. Well, they thought that was a compliment. That's the kiss of death. I can't see the VP of sales for any organization saying, hey, do you know who we need for this year's sales conference? Let's get a really nice guy.
Yeah.
That's that. Talk about blending into the woodwork.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized there was nothing about me that would help me stand out in the marketplace. And I was under such pressure to grow my business, to not only get back in the field, but to grow quickly because of financial need. And so I started looking around. I was trying to find information on how did you stand out in the marketplace. And back then, I couldn't find anything. There was the great book by Al Trout, Differentiate or Die.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to do more than just be different. If I slap every customer in the face, I'm different, but it doesn't mean there's a compelling reason to buy from me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started doing the research on how did you become, and the word I landed on was distinctive. What did it take to be more than different? What did it take to be different to the point that was compelling enough that customers would purchase? And that's where I started the research. And I just needed it for my own business. I had to stand out so I could, as you well know, Jeff, there's so many potential clients out there. Part of what we have to do is not only to sell, but we have to attract. A version of the Jim Rohn line that I use is the customers that you attract will be more valuable over a long period of time than the customers you've had to pursue.
Mm-hmm.
If you are so distinctive and then iconic in what you do that it attracts customers to do business with you, the lifetime value of those customers, the repeat business, the referral business, it typically is superior to those that you had to, twist their arm or compelled to buy. So I was searching for that in my own business, and it's that blinding flash, the obvious. Gosh, if I need this and I'm having a hard time finding it, what's the likelihood that there are other professionals in the same boat? So that's how it all came about, was just me trying to, continue to do what I love and to take it to a higher level of the business that I've been in for a long time. And it led to
fantastic. My mind is spinning right now. I'm doing a little self-evaluation, asking the question, because like you, I'm constantly bemoaning the fact of the similarities, the sameness that we see out there with people who are basically copycats of everything that they're seeing. And I'm asking myself the question, who does stand out? Who stands out in my life? What companies stand out? And I completely agree with you. The idea that if you are truly distinctive, they're going to find you, and that's what you want to do. You want to be so good that you can't be ignored, right? That's the idea. I'll tell you what, the idea of iconic, it's a big goal, and I wonder if some wouldn't find that to be a little bit unreachable right out of the gate. Murph, what do you think? Is Scott McKain reaching too far when he talks about trying to be not just distinctive, but iconic?
Yeah, I mean, that really is a big idea, isn't it? I mean, you think about what does that mean to be iconic? Walt Disney, Starbucks, it's big. It's beyond my comprehension.
But, it's interesting, though, as we're listening to Scott McKain, I think that, my interpretation, and we'll hear part 2 of this in the next episode, but my interpretation here is that he recognizes that being iconic is not necessarily something that is really, really easy, but it is essential if you want to stand out. In other words, his book and his message is not for everyone. His book is only for those people who are sort of sickened by the idea of blending in with everybody else.
Well, and I think we all want to stand out. We want to be different. So yeah, I'll be interested to see how we expand on that when we get to part 2.
We all have a story of a truly great sales experience, because that's really what being iconic is about. It's about that incredible experience, and that experience is most likely to be based on some sort of personal interaction. But we all have those stories, but those stories track back to 2 things. One is an organization that allowed it to happen in the first place. There was a culture of freedom where people were allowed to do extraordinary things. And then secondly, they were great people who were not content to blend in. right? And I remember years ago, I was speaking at a conference in Denver, Colorado, and there was I can't remember exactly how this worked, but there was like an arts and crafts fair going on where people had tables in the lobby of this big hotel, and they were selling, their handmade crafts, and I was just sort of kicking around, but I stopped at this one stand, and this lady was selling jewelry and that she had made, and it caught my eye because it was actually kind of nice jewelry. Now, of course, it wasn't diamonds and emeralds, but it looked nice. And she asked me, who you shopping for? And I said, well, I'm just I guess for my wife. And she said, great, what's the occasion? And I said, you know what? No occasion. I just like to let her know that I'm thinking about her when I'm on the road. Now, she could have asked any number of different questions here. She could have asked me about what kind of jewelry does my wife like and what's her favorite color and all of these different things. And quite frankly, I would have a very, very difficult time answering. But she didn't. She stopped and she looked at him and she said, that's so cool. Tell me about your wife. Just tell me about her. Forget the jewelry. Just tell me about your wife. Well, this is my favorite subject, right? I love talking about my wife, and it was really easy going. And we just chatted about my wife for a little while. So by the time we were done, she just said, hey, listen, can I make a couple of suggestions here for you just based on what I think I'm reading about your wife? And it was great. And the first thing she held up, I bought it. I bought it just like that. And she said, fantastic. Good. She's going to love it. Now, very, very important question. Do you have daughters? And by the time I was done, I dropped about $300 there. Now, I was just kicking around and killing time, but I dropped about $300 on something for my wife and a couple of things for my girls. It wasn't a lot of money, but it's $300 more that I was going to spend. But the key here is that was years and years ago, and here I am still telling the story. The secret wasn't a secret. She knew that I would be better off if I made this purchase. She knew that my life would improve. She knew it would make me look good, and she pushed me in a really fun, engaging way. She leveraged her relationship, and at the end of the day, it is people like that who make the experience iconic. So what is it for you? What did you grab from Scott McKain today that you can look at and say, this is what would take our presentation from distinctive to iconic? And our next episode, we'll dive in and hear the rest of our interview with Scott McKain.